Hello, all you reinventors. This is Lesley Jane Seymour, and I'm the founder of CoveyClub. Can you see here? I'm going to show you my t-shirt. There's my CoveyClub t-shirt, which you can buy on the CoveyClub site if you're interested. And I'm also the founder of this podcast. And I am really excited to talk to a very good friend of mine. I would say old, but we don't want to say that anymore today, even though it's a long time friend. Janice Kaplan, who is interesting. I did not know this until I spoke to her for this podcast. She's a different type of reinventor, and some of you may fall into that category. We've had a lot of serial reinventors, but I had not really talked to anybody who was kind of somebody who started out in many lanes all along and had 3 lanes going. You know, she was television producer, book writer, and magazine writer as well, all at once. So when it came to reinvention, she could move between those lanes fairly easily because she'd already set those up. It's kind of an interesting approach, something I'd never really thought about. So this is your 3-lane reinvention, which we had never talked about. I'm so ecstatic. That's something new. And what's wonderful is she's done a bunch of popular books. She did the New York Times bestseller, The Gratitude Diaries, a while ago. And she also talks about a couple of books that she'd written that were novels in the past. But her new book, What Your Body Knows About Happiness, is going to be published in January of 25. And that's why we're going to talk to you and talk to her about that. Her past was, as she says, after I left as editor-in-chief of Parade magazine, I began writing nonfiction books. The Gratitude Diaries became a national bestseller and got me interested in understanding more about how our bodies and minds work together to make us happy or not. So enjoy this podcast. You're going to get a lot of how-tos, how to use your body to make yourself more happy, and how to use your brain to make yourself more happy. And they may not be connected. So here is the wonderful Janice. So Janice, great to have you. This is so wonderful. It's been a while.
It's great to see you, Lesley. Thanks.
We were in the same business for a long, long time, and we are both reinventors so that people understand you and your background. Can you just give us sort of a brief of, where'd you grow up? What did you do? How'd you get into journalism? Very brief. And then we'll talk about your books and especially your new book.
Sure. Well, we're not going to go back to 4th grade, but basically.
No, 4th grade. No, I have people on here and they go, it was a dark and windy night.
Right.
I was like, no, brief.
I was a TV producer. I actually started as a producer at Good Morning America, and I was always writing magazine articles just like you were, and going back and forth. I had 3 basic different things. I was a TV producer, I was a magazine editor, and I was a novelist. And I was always going back and forth from one to the other. And sometimes I'd be in TV, I'd take a year off to write a novel. I would always write magazine articles. I was a columnist at the long forgotten magazines like 17 and Mademoiselle and Glamour.
I don't forget them. We grew up on them.
I know, we loved them. And I used to think, gosh, if only I had stuck to one thing, it would have worked out better. But at some point, I realized that all of media had pretty much merged together, and that kind of became my superpower, was that I knew how to do different things. So I was an editor at TV Guide, and then they started a TV group for me to run. And I was editor-in-chief of Parade magazine, and I did a lot of TV tie-ins. So finding different ways to do what would have been more standard jobs then was really a great start for me.
So were you always kind of not somebody who sat in one lane ever? Like, was that just who you were? Because we have a lot of people who are serial reinventors, but you kind of seem like somebody who is in many different lanes all the time. Is that how you describe sort of your personality?
That's interesting. I don't think I had thought of it that way, but that's exactly right.
Okay,
I
interesting.
was a journalist because I got bored quickly. And so I liked doing an article or a story or researching something and then going on to something else. But I think that was also true with career, that I liked being a TV producer, but I always wanted to be a writer. And how could I give up magazines? So it was fun for me to always keep different things going at once. And maybe that does help as you move on, that you have those different possibilities to fall back on.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach because I think a lot of people choose a lane and they stay in that lane and then they finish it or they get bored or they find it doesn't work anymore and then they have to change lanes and they don't really know how to do that. So we really never talked to anybody who's been doing the different lanes all the time. So that's interesting for everybody who's listening. That's a sort of a different approach. So let's talk about book writing. I didn't realize you did novels all along. I mean, people don't know here, we've known each other for a very long time when we were in publishing and when you were in TV, everything, a really long time. But I didn't know you'd been doing, were you writing novels all the way along? I didn't know that.
I did. I wrote a lot of novels, and then back in the early 2000s, I wrote three big books. Actually, they were chick lit, as it were, with
That's what I remember, but I didn't know
yeah.
that was just
Yeah,
part
they
of
had
what you've
gone
been
back
doing.
earlier, but those were the big
Okay.
ones. They were the Botox Diaries, The Men I Didn't
That's what I
Marry, and Mine Are
remember.
Spectacular. Yeah, those were pretty big books at the time. And then I did a bunch of similar mysteries with similar, with funny characters. But then after I left Parade, I pretty much transitioned to doing nonfiction, and that's what I've been doing for the last dozen or so years.
So let's talk a little bit about Gratitude because that was one of your bestsellers. Talk about that book, why you got it started, when it came out, and how that can help us today, and then how it progressed into your new book, which is coming out shortly.
So many things happen a little bit by chance. We always think that we lay out our careers so very carefully and know exactly where we're going to go, and you don't. You take opportunities as they come. So when I left Parade, a big foundation came to me and said that the head of the foundation really loved some of the cover stories I had done at Parade, and it was a very intellectual foundation, and they wanted to reach more people. And so, what would I like a grant to do? And I thought, I don't know what you're talking about.
That
What
was,
can I
first of all,
do?
so insane to have
I
somebody come
know.
with a grant. People have to apply for grants, they have to find them, they
It
have to
was it
chase
was
them.
Yeah, it was pretty lovely. But so we kept having lunch. They kept taking me out to these nice lunches. And then they told me about a project that they were doing in London on gratitude, a huge project. And I said, well, if it's gratitude you want, that's easy. Little did I know. And so I got funded by them to do a big national survey on gratitude. And really, it was not a topic I had particularly thought about before. But I started doing the survey and then just got completely fascinated by it and spent the next year just doing research. And then at that point, I decided, hey, this might be a book. And I did the Gratitude Diaries, which was my year of living more gratefully with lots of research and studies behind it. And that was really life changing for me because
Hmm.
while was something that just kind of landed at my feet, as I said, and then almost started as just a literary premise, like, gosh, wouldn't it be fun to do a book where I'm living more gratefully? It worked. And I started to see a change in myself. I mean, I think, like you, Leslie, I've always been an upbeat person, but I
Hmm.
was thinking about things differently and I was approaching things differently. And when there was a bad situation, I kind of knew what to do. And I think part of the power of gratitude is that it gives you a sense of control back. So when
Hmm.
things are not feeling good, part of the despair is that absolute helplessness that you feel.
Yes.
But if you think
Right.
like, okay, I can stop and get a different perspective on this. I can stop and think, what's the good side of this? What
Right.
could possibly be good about this?
Right.
It gives you this
Right.
wonderful sense of, okay, the world is not as out of control as I think it is.
Right. Right. Even when it feels like it really is out of control.
It
Well,
does.
just to let everybody know, we happen to be filming this right after the election when everything feels totally out of control. I was like, oh my God, thank God I'm talking to Janice. This is great. So, what does it do for your brain? Because, we've heard this all along, about being grateful and do your gratitude lists and blah, 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 blah. But it does have physical impacts that are useful for us as well. It's not just sort of feeling like you're in control. It's not, what I try to do when I fly because I don't like to fly. I wish I had one of those kids steering wheels in the back where I could, hit the thing like I would have any idea. But I want control, right? But beyond that, it does a lot of chemical stuff for you, is my understanding.
Well, absolutely. And one of the things that was a surprise when I wrote the Gratitude Diaries was to see the profound impact that gratitude can have on health and on
Yes.
stress levels and on our bodies. And so the new book that I wrote, What Your Body Knows About Happiness, sort of turned that around to say, okay, we think of gratitude as coming from, we think of most things as coming from the brain, right? We think of our brain as being the big conscious center that determines how we feel, how we look at the world. But sometimes it works the opposite way. And I'll tell you how it hit me, Lesley, was it was a day that I was traveling. And you don't like to fly, and sometimes those days are just awful. And it was one of those days where the luggage was lost and nothing was
Oh God, yeah.
and I was standing in this little airport and just so frustrated and tense. And I thought, okay, I'm the gratitude lady. I will do my little gratitude exercises. I'm so happy that I have my bathing suit in my carry-on bag and, doing all these things. And my husband and I at least started to laugh. And then the place we were going, we needed to go by boat. We finally get on the boat. And all of a sudden, the sun is shining. It's warm. Wind is in my hair. And I just suddenly felt great. I didn't have to tell myself anything. I was just suddenly relaxed. All the stress was gone. And that was the moment where I thought, what happens? What are the signals that our bodies are sending that all of a sudden is telling me to be happy? And that was the start of the research for this book.
So talk about that. Talk about, because we hear about the reverse all the time. So give us some of your major findings then.
Well, it is that whole sense of our brains are great and brilliant and all of that, but you know what? They're just sitting there in that dark skull. They're not getting any information that you're not sending to them. They are
Mhm.
completely dependent on the sensations, on the environment, simple things that we already know. There's huge research about being outdoors and how being
Mm,
outdoors changes how we feel. I mentioned being on a boat, and as it happens,
mm,
water turns out to be one of the greatest happiness inducers. Being around water, cities everywhere have reclaimed their waterfronts at great cost. And if you happen to be near a place where you can go and take a walk by the water, research shows that 2 hours a week by the water can completely change your sense of well-being, and doesn't have to
mm.
be 2 hours at once, half an hour here or there. If you're inland, get one of those little, what are they called? Sort of those electric waterfalls that you can have in your living room, plug it in. Just the calmness of the water gurgling.
Oh,
Going
interesting.
to do something. There's lots of research on some simple things like flowers. I see you
Mm,
have pretty trees behind you there,
mm,
Lesley,
mhm,
and
mhm.
having flowers is actually something that research shows makes us happy. And maybe it goes
Mhm.
back in evolution to the time that when we were out and trying to sustain ourselves in the fields, and when we saw flowers, it meant, oh, berries are going to come and food is going to follow.
Right, right. That
So
makes sense.
whatever the old wiring is, flowers still make us happy. And there was research where people were sent, I think it was flowers and candles and one other thing, and their sense of well-being improved much better with the flowers. Um,
So interesting. And I was a huge gardener. I'm not a gardener
oh,
down
that's
here
right.
because it's Jurassic Park down here. Whatever you plant, it's July and August. It's about 50 times bigger than whatever you'd see up north. So I have somebody doing most of it, but I have flowers all around the property, everywhere I am. And yes, I've always thought that that makes a difference. And also standing in the middle of live flowers when you're in there with them, you can feel, I know it sounds cheesy, people, but you can feel a vibration. I have pictures of my garden where you can almost see it in the photograph. There's vibration that goes on with those flowers, and I'm not from California.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the tree huggers had it right.
Yeah,
There is something about nature that's meant to be. It's where we're meant to be.
right.
On simpler things like sit up straight, there's research that shows. I spoke to one doctor who's done a huge amount of research on posture, and the interesting thing about that is when you're depressed, you naturally
Mm,
kind of slouch, right? Your body
mhm,
goes over. Your
mhm.
brain is always scanning your body to figure out what's going on. And so when you're slouched, your brain is immediately goes into a negative mode. And he's actually done research with college students where he asks them to slouch and he asks them to sit up straight. And he did it with me also. And when you're slouched, it's much easier to access negative experiences. You can try this later. Slouch over and try to think about something negative that's happened to you. It'll pop into your mind immediately.
Really? Oh, okay.
And then when you sit up, it's harder to access those negative feelings, and it's much easier to access a positive feeling. So sometimes when you're walking down the street and you're frustrated or you're upset about something, if you just stop and stand up and put your head a little bit higher, it's surprising how that sends a message to your brain that things are better.
Mm,
We've all read the research from long ago about smiling, right? Do you remember that
mm,
stuff, Leslie,
mm,
where you put a
mm.
pencil in your mouth, and if they put it so that your muscles are smiling, you end up feeling happier than if your muscles are in a frown position. And we all like to think that our brains are smart enough to know whether we're smiling or whether we have a pencil in our mouth, but actually not. Again, our brains are constantly scanning our bodies to see what's going on. One more thing on that.
No, no, no. These are good. These are helpful. These are things that people can actually do, which I think
Right.
people are all going to want to do.
One more thing on that is the sense of the signals that your body is sending are very hard to change. So Leslie, you said you don't like to fly. And when you're on
Mhm.
a plane, your palms get sweaty, your chest starts pounding. And so if you sit there and tell yourself, oh, I'm very calm, this is not a problem, your brain is going, I'm sorry, that's not correct. I know you're not calm
Yeah.
because your chest is pounding and your palms are sweaty.
Hmm.
But if you can find a way to turn that around into something that sends the same signal, so maybe it's that you're excited, because when you're excited, your chest is also pounding and your palms are also sweaty. And I've tried that sometimes when I'm giving speeches before a big group, and I start to think, oh, I'm so anxious, and then I go,
Right.
not anxious. I'm pretty excited. There are a thousand
Right.
people out there and I'm getting to talk to them. And
Right.
your brain buys that. Your brain goes, okay, that makes sense. Yep, that fits in with that fits in with what you're feeling. And just that little change in perspective can really make a big difference.
Oh, so interesting. And what did you find that was the most surprising thing? Was there anything that you didn't expect that showed up that kind of threw you for a loop?
I was surprised about the power of placebos and
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
some of
sure.
the things around us, because again, we think, yeah, I kind of get that. But there was research, for example, that found if you have a lot of Kleenex boxes around somebody, they're going to feel sicker, or they're going to well, let me see. I think the research specifically was they invited people into a lab and they had some people watch a video where people were sneezing and coughing, and then they talked about germs and they talked about colds, and they had tissue boxes all around them and they had all the things that are associated with that. And within the next week, the people who had that versus the people who had watched a neutral video and had a neutral experience were something like 40% more likely to actually end up with a cold. And it sounds crazy and it sounds impossible, but our bodies and our minds are in a very tight loop that way. Perhaps a slightly more almost able to believe experiment was a wonderful experiment that was done out of Yale, where some people were given a warm cup of coffee to hold and some people were given iced coffee to hold, and then it was taken away from them, and then they came for what they thought was the real part of the research, which was they were given descriptions of people and asked what they thought of them. You know what I'm going to say next. The people who were holding the warm coffee described the people as warmer and kinder than the people who were holding
Wow.
the iced
That's
coffee.
so interesting.
Our brains and our bodies think in metaphors. Warm coffee, warm person. Research has found that if you sit on a hard chair, you negotiate harder than if you sit on a soft chair. Again, soft chair, soft heart, maybe. And so those are things that you can be aware of in your own environment, of how you want your space to feel. If you want to feel softer and kinder, throw some pretty pillows around, throw some
It's
soft pillows around, and you'll feel differently than if you're sitting in a hard, straight chair.
It's funny. That was the first thing we noticed when Anna Wintour took over Vogue from Grace Mirabella. She got rid of the soft chairs and put in metal chairs. And you sometimes weren't even allowed to sit. You would just have to stand behind the chair. And that's what she wanted. She did not want you to be comfortable. She did not want you to spend a lot of time in there. She wanted to hear it and get out. And it was a message right there in the chairs that we were looking at.
That's fascinating. And
Isn't that
it's the
crazy?
message, and the message was also in your bodies, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You
Oh yeah.
found
And she
it.
was a lot tougher. She was a
Yeah,
lot more metallic, let's say.
that's fascinating. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. I love
Yeah.
that.
That's exactly the same thing. Were you disappointed by any of the research? Was there anything that you expected to find that you didn't find or that you thought might have been lost somewhere?
I find this so much of this fascinating and exciting. And one of the joys for me was to be able to pull different kinds of research together because people don't always think of these
Right.
things in one way. So I did some research on food and how we respond to food. And there's really interesting research that, and I'll have to get the details from, you'll have to read the details in the book because I don't remember
That's
the.
okay. That's all right.
But
You
there
can
are
give us the
things that, like, if
general.
you eat ice cream from a light colored bowl, it tastes sweeter than if you eat it from a dark colored bowl. And there was a researcher
Wow.
who was able to make people describe wine in different ways, depending on what kind of rooms and situations he put them in. So we think that everything we're experiencing is, is something very specific, but we forget that all of our senses are working together and experiencing the things. And food is particularly powerful that way. I think that same researcher found that we are happiest with the first taste of food that we have. So the first time you take a little taste of that chocolate, and actually, Lesley, you know what? You're somebody who knows this because I remember, if I may tell a story about you, I remember a million years ago being in a restaurant and you were at the restaurant and a few tables over and you're always so beautiful and slim and you had
You're
ordered a
cute.
big dessert and I looked over at you and you took two tastes of the dessert and you were so happy and you pushed it away. And I thought, oh, that's how you do it. And I always remember that.
Somehow no longer,
And
but yeah.
I actually thought of that when I spoke to this researcher because he found that actually your sensations are happiest with the earliest tastes. So if you
Ooh,
eat too much,
interesting.
you're actually making yourself less happy. If you imagine,
Ooh,
like, the
love.
first taste is so exciting, it's a 10. The second taste is a 9, and all the way down to 1. Well, if you stop at about 7, you've had a really good experience. If you go down to 1, it averages out much lower. So it's not just that it's better for us to eat less, it actually makes you happier to just have small tastes of something and treasure it. And I think the people who do the very expensive chefs who do tasting menus have figured that out. Give people a little taste of something and they're really going to love it, and then give them another little taste. So
And
it's an interesting way to think about eating.
and that's interesting from a midlife point of view when it's harder to lose the weight or harder to manage your weight issues, where if you follow that, you could do two little tiny, pedophore size parts of dessert instead of the whole big huge thing. Just put that on the plate. And that might be you're happier, you're more satisfied at the same time. And you don't have to go the 5,000 calorie route.
That's right.
Interesting.
And if you think of it, not that you're denying yourself something, but that you're
Right.
actually providing yourself extra happiness by
That's
doing.
so interesting. Wow. Was there anything else that came up that you were shocked by or, you know, confused by? Was there anything that you couldn't figure out?
Well, there's a lot of, because you and I are creative people, there's some interesting research about creativity and
Oh,
finding that we're more creative when we move and when we move around. And actually, sitting here in front of our computers and trying to write is probably the worst way to try to be creative. And it was interesting in terms of children also, because children and adults learn with their bodies. And probably the worst thing we do to kids is tell them to sit down and be
Yeah, sit
quiet.
still, right.
And that still exists in classrooms. And so I think if we can free ourselves a little bit also, so if you're stuck on something, if you're having a hard time figuring something out, go out and take a walk around your apartment or your house, or just move a little bit, and somehow the movement changes how you feel. One other thing I love is that, again, I said, I don't mean to undermine our brilliant brains, but our
Mhm.
brains like to be as lazy as possible. And so if there's nothing that changes in the environment, your brain kind of goes on automatic pilot. And what you want is to be stimulating yourself, particularly maybe as you get older and as you're trying to experience new things. And so give yourself those new experiences. It doesn't have to be an exotic vacation. You can drive a different direction to the grocery store, go to a
Mm,
farmer's
mm,
market and eat a
mm,
different fruit than you've ever had
mm,
before.
mm-hmm,
Your brain is going to perk up and go, oh, what is that?
mm.
Persimmon or whatever it is.
Right,
But
right.
just giving yourself a physical, tactile, visual, whatever it is, experience that awakens your brain in a different way and makes you feel better and makes you feel different. And I think that's an interesting way to think about happiness too.
Yeah, no, and I always find that. I always find, first of all, the movement thing, I definitely find is that if I can get up and walk away and walk or go do something physical that is, usually I'm in the shower going like this. And then I'm like, oh, that's what the thing is. It's like you can sit here and push your brain and it's not going to go anywhere. And it's not until you start moving that happens. That definitely. And the idea also, we talk a lot about it, reinvention at CoveyClub, and that's one of the things that you can do is put yourself into a new environment, push yourself to try things. And what I say is when people join the club, don't just take the classes that you want. Go take the woo-woo weird class that you're kind of vaguely curious about or you heard about. It may not be your first thing you want to do, but you never know what's lying around the corner there for you. Because a lot of times the real breakthroughs come when you push yourself outside that immediate ring of what you're comfortable with, don't you think?
I do, and I think that's great. And I think that what you're doing is so wonderful and encouraging people to see things differently. I mean, the whole thing that you're doing with the Covey Club of reinvention, and life doesn't have to be the same, and there's an excitement in trying things that are new, and that's great. The try a different class. I may steal that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, it's just but it really, I find people, it's discovery. Discovery is exciting. Discovery is part of what pushes you further through. And also, when you get to that level where you're putting butterflies in your stomach, I think that's a good indicator of where you need to be if you're really going to work on, making big change. That to me is you're putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation, and that's where you grow.
Right, and your brain gets excited by that.
Right.
Because
Challenged.
it's saying what's going on here,
Right.
and you become more alert and more alive than if you just keep trying to do the same things.
Sitting in the same old rut doesn't necessarily get you where you want to be.
Mhm.
Talking to new people, trying new things, doing things a different way, um, are, well, those are ways to feel refreshed as well, just in your everyday life. Are there any other things that you want to tell us before we talk about where to find the book?
No, I think we've got it.
Okay, cool. So where do we find you? Where do we find the book?
Well, my website is just janicekaplan.com, and the book should be all over, I hope, by now.
Every bookstore.
You can
Yes.
get it at your local bookstore. You can get it at Amazon.com, Barnes and Noble, Bookshop.com, but it's definitely up on Amazon right now.
Oh,
And uh,
so you can pre-order even if you
you can
want.
pre-order
Okay.
it. You can pre-order it right now, and
Ruby.
it gets you the lowest price when it comes out.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Oh,
Whatever price you order it at on a pre-order, whatever it goes down to, is what they charge you when the book comes out.
I
Yep,
didn't know that. Okay,
nice
so you
little
just
treat.
learned something. Thank you.
Yeah,
All right, Janice, thanks so much.
my pleasure. Great to see you, Lesley.
So I hope you enjoyed this podcast with Janice. I hope you got a lot of tips that you could take home. Go grab her book. I can't wait to read it. And I hope this will get you into the podcast and you will follow us. Share the podcast with anybody you know who's trying to reinvent, and mosey on over to CoveyClub.com for all kinds of free downloads, guides, essays, checklists. If you are serious about reinventing, you should also actually join us. We are a group of very smart, accomplished women, just like Janice and me, who are here to help you get through that change. Change is hard. The reason why I invented Covey Club is because change is difficult and it's really hard to do alone. And what I discovered by doing this is that it's easier to do it in a group. So come to us. And what's really wonderful is we have a thing we call the Academy now, which is 400 of our previous classes already preloaded. And you can start learning about anything you want, from how to reset up your LinkedIn, how to make it work harder for you, to leadership skills, to how to write a book later in life. Whatever you're interested in, it's all there for you once you join. So take care, and I hope to see you next time.